Hello again. Well, this is Satan's Trilogy, and I am reading Book 3, Chapter 4, and this will be reading 92. I am the author and the narrator, and so sit back, relax, and let the story unfold. The girls started eating, and it was quite an experience. Riley Grace said, "I have never had anything like this in my life, and truthfully, Raven and I have eaten a lot of deli mates." Raven finished a bit of her sandwich and commented, "Riley Grace isn't exaggerating. We have eaten a lot of deli sandwiches, and I have never had anything as wonderful as this." Otto and Axel were both smiling and happy to hear such comments. Axel said, "Otto and I love to have German sandwiches at least twice a month, and we agree with you. These cheeses and meats make the best sandwiches. I am so happy that you enjoy them." Day finished her first sandwich and offered a comment. "Perhaps we should learn more about how you find these items so that our father can sell them in his store." Esther smiled at Day. "Our community has a small German base, only about 6%, but good food should always be popular if you can get people to try it." Esther smiled and added, "Sometimes people refuse new ways of any type. I guess I can understand that. It's comfortable with what you know." Riley Grace spoke up, "I don't mind trying changes, especially food." Esther chuckled. "Americans seem not to mind new experiences and even changes. Perhaps it's because this country doesn't have the many centuries of history that old world countries do." One of Buller's security staff entered the room and whispered into Otto's ear. Esther could hear the discussion. Otto had asked for an update on the car parked nearby. The car belonged to another family from Germany, a family that the Buller family had once been rivals against. Esther spoke up. "Otto, perhaps I can have this issue dealt with, and without any problems developing." Esther smiled at Otto, then added, "I have a friend." Otto understood that Esther was a remarkable young woman, but he had always handled security himself. Axel had listened to Esther and turned smiling to his brother. "Otto, please let our little saint take care of this." Axel smiled at Otto and added, "She has a way of doing the right thing." Otto studied Esther just for a second and then looked at his brother. He then turned to the security guard and told him to forget the outside issue. Never questioning his directives, the man said, "Yes, sir," and walked away. Esther looked at her last bite of a wonderful sandwich and pulled out her phone. Sliding the cover slightly up, she just placed her thumb on the glass print reader, and a call was automatically made for her. Immediately, someone answered. Esther smiled. "John, do you ever go home?" she asked. "This is my home. You know that, Esther." John paused and then added, "So what can I do for you, Esther?" "I am with my friends, Axel and Otto Buller. They are retired, John, but some of the old competition doesn't seem to believe it. There are two men in a Mercedes-Benz CLS 400. They are watching my retired friends and annoying them by making themselves obvious on the street. John said, Esther, things are slow at the moment. What would you like for us to do? Their car looks fast. Take them by surprise and question them for several hours. Let them know that Axel Bueller is retired, living out his last years with his brother. Esther quickly added, Oh, and John, let them know that the federal government likes it that way. John asked one last question. Esther, what should I do with these two? Quickly responding, Esther said, Release them after 24 hours with a firm warning to stay away from the Bueller brothers. John seemed in positive spirits and said, Esther, I have agents nearby. They will come in at about now. John chuckled a bit. Esther have a great night. Esther smiled and said, You too, John, and thanks. Axel and Otto were looking out the window and were pleased to see several cars surround the nuisance vehicle and pull the two men out. Within seconds, the men were cuffed and hauled away, and within a couple of minutes, the car was also hauled off. Otto said, Amazing. Then he realized that he had been ignoring his guests and quickly said, We have dessert too. Everyone into the kitchen, please. We have a warm German chocolate cake from the oven and fresh whipped cream. Otto smiled. You are going to love this. The cake had bits of dark chocolate mixed in. The girls agreed. The cake was thin in the form of cake, and they all enjoyed one large piece of it. Esther smiled at everyone around the kitchen island. Raven sat next to Axel, and Riley Grace was on his other side. Day was alongside of Otto, and Esther was between Otto and Riley Grace. Everyone was smiling, laughing, and enjoying the moment. This has been a wonderful visit, said Esther. But now we must go. My uncle is expecting us. He has promised to give me my first lesson in the kitchen. Esther continued after seeing that everyone's faces slowly changed. Uncle Hung cooked for Master Zhao for 24 years before coming to this country. Esther appeared passionate. He is a great chef, and this will be a great honor for me. Axel saw the excitement in Esther's eyes. Well then, Esther, you must be going then. We enjoyed your visit as well. Axel looked at all four girls and said, We enjoyed having all of you. Please come back soon. Perhaps we can plan a special event. My birthday is coming up in a month from today, and Otto is insisting we have a celebration. Otto quickly piped up, and said, It's not every day you turn 70. Seldom has anyone in our family seen such an old age. I think it needs celebrated. Otto added, I'll send a card to Esther and she can bring all of you, if you are free that day. Otto didn't want to assume that everyone would want to come. Esther paused a moment. If at all possible, I'll be honored to come. Raven Day and Riley Grace all quickly agreed they would love to come too. Riley Grace added, I have never been invited to a birthday celebration. This is so wonderful. Riley Grace was beaming with excitement. This made Axel and Otto feel honored and excited too. They would give Riley Grace a first in her life. Axel said, I am so looking forward to this now. Axel looked at Riley Grace, smiling. He added, I have something in mind to make this extra special for you. Axel gave Riley Grace a wink and smiled. The girls left and headed towards the Shaw Tin restaurant. Day was driving the Escalade as they all discussed a myriad of subjects from school to cooking. It was still early, and the Shaw Tin restaurant didn't open for another hour. The girls had parked and jumped out of the car, eager to see what was next on the day's adventures. All four girls entered the restaurant with Esther leading them. Uncle Hung was busy with a waitress helping her with setting a table. Looking up, he saw Esther and her companions and quickly left the waitress to welcome Esther. Esther, welcome. I have been waiting for you. Mr. Hung was smiling and excited. I am so pleased that you want me to show you our methods of cooking. Mr. Hung gave Esther a hug and quickly viewed the other three girls. So who do we have here? Esther spoke in English. You know my sister, Day. Esther pointed at Day standing by her. This is Raven, our closest friend. Esther hugged Raven as she introduced her to her uncle. Raven pulled her black hair back over her left ear, then smiled at Esther's uncle and held out her hand. Mr. Hung took her hand and pulled her to him. Esther's best friend is very special to me. Mr. Hung hugged her and said, Welcome to Shaw Tin Restaurant. He then looked her in the face. Mr. Hung said, You are always welcome. Esther quickly added, This is Raven's sister and our other best friend, Riley Grace. Esther pulled Riley Grace towards her and kissed her on the cheek. Riley Grace was so thrilled with hearing Esther's words that she broke out into a huge smile. Speaking in Chinese, Esther told Mr. Hung, Soon they will be capable of anything. Mr. Hung looked at Esther. Her face was smiling, but with a slightly hidden bit of pride, and Mr. Hung knew this indeed meant the girls were special. Looking at Riley Grace, Mr. Hung held his hand out to Riley Grace as if to offer a handshake, but when Riley Grace took it, Mr. Hung pulled her forward and to him. He gave her a hug and kiss on the cheek, then told her, Young lady, you seem so mature for such a young girl. Riley Grace loved hearing Mr. Hung say this and beamed with pride. Mr. Hung paused and then added while looking at Raven and Riley Grace, I would be honored if you both called me Uncle when you come to visit me. Esther stood for a moment slightly surprised by her uncle's suggestion, and then she beamed in pride, saying, It looks like our extended family is growing. The girls knew that Mr. Hung was very special to Esther, and perhaps very special in many other ways. Raven and Riley Grace both immediately said they would be honored to call Mr. Hung Uncle. I have a suggestion, said Mr. Hung. Behind Mr. Hung stood a beautiful young Chinese girl. This is my daughter, Wei. She will instruct you on our operations. Perhaps someday you will return and work in our restaurant. While you are learning our operations, I will give Esther her first lesson in the kitchen. Mr. Hung looked at the three girls. Chinese families are close. We support each other. You will never be obligated to be here, but you will always be welcomed. You three are very special, and I will be honored whenever you choose to walk into this restaurant. Mr. Hung bowed to the three and raised his head to them, then smiled. His face had nothing but love for the girls, and they could see it. Riley Grace quickly bowed back to Mr. Hung and replied, Uncle, I will study my Chinese. I look forward to returning someday to work here. Day and Raven both smiled and bowed, offering appreciation for their new uncle's offer. Wei is tall for Chinese, perhaps 5'7". She wore a traditional dress of silk and had long black hair. Her red lips appeared to be the only makeup she had on, and it was enough. Wei was a truly beautiful young woman of perhaps mid-20s. Smiling at the three girls as Esther left with her father, Wei said, "My father is very wise, and I trust his path to be true. Perhaps we will all be close friends someday." Wei raised her arm to follow her, and she began her instructions on how the restaurant served hundreds of customers a night, including the electronic process of receiving payment. 80% of our customers pay with a credit card, and so we have a dedicated internet line for processing all bank cards. The process confuses some of our girls. Wei paused. "I am certain that you three will have no problem understanding the paperwork involved." Wei had decided that all three girls were highly intelligent. After explaining how to process credit cards, Wei said, "We seldom have more than 4,000 cash at any night, but I suspect that would attract many robbers. So we have a security company pick up cash receipts at 8 in the evening. If we are robbed, the loss will be less." Walking towards a far wall where the table had not been prepared yet, Wei explained how the restaurant sets each table's setting. "These are simple things," said Wei, "but it is how we make our returning customers feel comfortable." At that moment, Wei had finished setting the table, and it looked perfect. A rolled cloth napkin with a knife and fork inside of it, a large plate, and a water glass was placed at each setting, with a cup turned upside down on a saucer. Each place setting was given a wrapped set of chopsticks. Many people took them as souvenirs. Everything was placed upon a fresh white linen cloth. Riley Grace was amazed and said so. "Wow, you did this so quickly, and it all looks perfect." Wei grinned. "I have prepared thousands of tables. Something would be wrong with me if I couldn't make it look easy." Wei smiled and added, "Making it look perfect is what takes time." Wei turned straight on to the girls and said, "Since Esther has come into our lives, our business has tripled, and my father has hired 60 more people." Wei smiled and continued, "My dad credits the wonderful karma of Esther with our recent success." Raven spoke up. "What do you think?" Wei quickly answered, "I agree with my father. We owe our recent success to Esther. There is no doubt in my mind about it." Wei smiled and quickly changed the subject. "If we hurry, I'll show you our complete operations behind the scenes so that you understand how we are able to serve over 600 people an evening." Wei smiled as she moved her arm in front of her to motion the girls to follow her towards the back of the restaurant. Wei took the girls to the long storeroom of fresh vegetables and the fresh seafood stored in the adjacent coolers. Huge inventories of dry goods, including rice, beans, and spices. Everything was huge, and the change had happened nearly overnight. The bank had loosened its earlier tight loan restrictions and had allowed Mr. Hung to expand to meet the rising demand at the restaurant. Wei explained the logistics and the numbers involved, while the girls simply listened and absorbed it all. "That is our entire operation," Wei smiled. The three girls looked at each other. They all three saw one small flaw that was needing explained. They spoke first. Wei, my father supplies you with fresh produce. You only receive this from him twice a week, but it is always on the day after he receives it. He can have the produce a day earlier if you are willing to receive it in the afternoon. This will give you fresher produce to work with. Wei looked at Day and paused, then said, I will speak with my father. I see no reason to not agree with you. Fresher produce is always best. My father wants the best. Wei smiled and said, You girls are very lucky. You all have brains, looks, and each other. At that moment, Esther and Mr. Hung came around the corner. Mr. Hung had a very large smile. Oh, here you are. Have you all learned something today? Asked Mr. Hung. Wei quickly spoke up. Father, our new friends are very capable. They are ready for anything that we ask of them. Wei smiled, glancing at the three. I am very impressed. I promise you that any one of these three can walk into our restaurant when needed and fill a crucial role. Mr. Hung listened to his daughter and turned to Day, Raven, and Riley Grace. Well then, we are all three officially welcome as Wei's replacements whenever she needs some time off. Raven, Esther, Day, and Riley Grace all looked at Wei and realized that she hungered for something else. Her love and commitment to her father was strong, but she had dreams that were waiting to see light. Esther looked at Riley Grace and said, Why don't you stay tonight and replace Wei? I am impressed with your Chinese. We'll come back before midnight and pick you up. Riley Grace burst into a large smile with the thought that Esther would support her with this opportunity. Mr. Hung saw that Riley Grace was eager to prove herself and quickly joined with Esther in the suggestion. That is an excellent idea. Wei has never had a day off, and I know that Riley Grace would do a wonderful job. Well then, said Esther, you will need to prepare for the evening by dressing as a Chinese restaurant host. Esther smiled. Let's go to the back dressing room for women. I have something for you. Esther walked up to a locker about 4 feet wide and several feet deep. Opening the door, there were a half-dozen silk dresses inside, fashioned after the one Wei had on, with an additional embroidered silhouette of the mountain range, Shaoten, across the back. Esther pulled a dress out that looked like it would fit Riley Grace. There are 2 pair of shoes in the cabinet for each of us. A red pair of high heels and a pair of red flats, should your feet start to hurt. Riley Grace was quickly changing into the dress as Esther spoke and searched the locker for her shoes. With a huge smile, Riley Grace said, I love it. I really love this. The shoes feel wonderful and they make me much taller. Esther looked on with pride as Riley Grace was transformed into a beautiful young restaurant hostess. Wei was behind Riley Grace, pulling and tugging on her hair as she found open opportunities to do so. As Riley Grace slipped into the red 3-inch heels, Wei completed braiding Riley Grace's hair, and she stepped forward looking like another woman. She appeared older, more confident, and distinctly Oriental, although no one would ever mistake Riley Grace with her blonde hair as anyone from the Orient. This is obviously a parallel with Esther's history as being born Chinese and having a different heritage than the Orient. "Riley Grace," said Esther, "you look stunning and professional at the same time." Riley Grace smiled, turned to look into a full-length mirror on the wall, and stunned by her transformation. "Wow, I really do look ready as a hostess." With a big grin, Riley Grace smiled at the girls and said, "I believe there are a few more tables that I'll need to set up. I will see you around midnight." Raven was impressed. "You look fantastic." Hugging her sister, Raven said, "Have fun. We'll see you later." Esther looked at Wei. "Why don't you come with us? We are just going to run about, do a few errands, and then we'll be back for Riley Grace." Wei looked at Esther, turned to Raven, and then Day. Perhaps it was Day that won her over, because she then said, "You girls are really fantastic." Wei leaned over to Riley Grace, gave her a kiss on the cheek, then turned to Esther and said, "I am ready." Wei produced the largest smile that the girls had ever seen on her. Day's comment was, "Let's go then." Turning to Riley Grace, Day said, "We will see you later." Day leaned to Riley Grace and gave her a hug. As her sister and friends left, Riley Grace went to work completing the table settings, then organized the front reception area. Dinner time started at 4, and it appeared the night would be busy. The reservation book was nearly full, and the walk-ins always filled the space between. And I'm going to stop there. That was reading 92, and I hope you enjoyed it. So until next time, be safe and take care. Thank you for listening.